I was in high school, I had a teacher who had tattooed on eyebrows, and her real eyebrows were shaved off. And I remember telling her, I said, someday I'm just going to shave off my eyebrows and just get them drawn on like that. And she said, that would be ridiculous. You shouldn't do that. You should just keep your natural eyebrows. I just think that that is really funny now. Rolla, what is wrong? She keeps crying and then she won't come when I call her to me. One moment, please. I've collected the cat. Okay. Forgot exactly where I left off. I find that incredibly ironic now. Anyways, hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Will, and for this video I wanted to do another installment of a series that I haven't done in a little bit, and that is Did They Deserve It?, where I discuss deaths of horror movie characters and whether or not they deserve to die, because let's be honest, a lot of people in horror movies are absolute idiots and they get what's coming to them, whether they were a shitty person or they were just a stupid person. Sometimes deaths are deserved in movies, and I like to give my opinion on whether or not they deserved it. I only have 2 other videos in this series, one of which is Carrie and the other was the first Final Destination movie. And so for this video, I wanted to decide who deserved their deaths in Final Destination 2. This movie was released in 2003, and like its predecessor, this movie follows along with Death as Death tries to eliminate people who have cheated Death. Destination 2, I think, is one of the most memorable ones in the whole franchise because it features a car crash and it features a very memorable scene where logs come flying out of the back of a truck and kill somebody, and I feel like that is kind of just permanently ingrained in a lot of people's minds when they're driving on the road, especially when they see a vehicle with things on the back of it, and I absolutely hate that. So the first Final Destination left us with 4 characters who did not deserve to die and 3 who did. Sticking with the same rule I did with the initial Final Destination, which is that nobody deserved their initial deaths, that they would have died had the main character not had the premonition. So in this case, no one deserved to die in the car crash, but some of them did deserve their next death. So let's get started. In this movie, we found out that Alex Browning isn't returning, and he was just merely killed off-screen in between the movies. His character honestly annoyed the fuck out of me because every time he tried to help, he just ended up making things worse. And he kept doing things that always made him look suspicious and made him out to be like some sort of killer, and if he wasn't so stupid, maybe he could have potentially talked some sense into some people and saved a few more lives. And rather than just taking the initiative to try and show up at the crime scene unprepared, he could have, I don't know, done anything else. But I guess I do have to give him credit for wanting to help in the first place. He was genuinely concerned about the safety for everyone else on the plane. He did try to help every person who was meant to die. I think he could have just gone about it another way than grabbing Luton's bloody knife, leaving it at the crime scene, and then fleeing. Still, I'm gonna go ahead and throw him on the did not deserve it list. Anyways, this movie starts off with a news report stating that it has been a year since the Flight 180 incident. Now, because of this, we aren't going to let stupidity off of the hook as easily, because in this world now, they're all aware of the Flight 180 crash, they're all aware of Alex Browning and his premonition about the death and how Death eventually caught up with all of these people. They're aware of this, they realize that this is a thing in this world, so when Death starts targeting them, they should be more aware of it more quickly and actually try and stop it, right? Our protagonist for this movie is a girl named Kimberly Corman. She's getting ready to go on a spring break trip with her friend Shayna Gordon, who I think is meant to be the spunky I don't give a fuck type character. It's kind of hard to tell because Final Destination is never really that big on character development. It more so focuses on the deaths, which I can respect. They pick up a couple of their friends, Frankie Arnold and Dano Royale. Much like in the first movie, before Death actually comes knocking at her doorstep, Kimberly sees a lot of foreboding signs that this trip is not going to end well for any of them. She sees a bus full of students chanting "pile up, pile up, pile up," which, fun fact, If you look closely at what they were wearing, they went to Mount Abraham, which is where the students in the first movie went to school. She also sees a spooky little boy jamming some of his toy vehicles together, and honestly that would be enough to just direct me right off the road and straight to Walgreens to get my prescription of birth control. If I've learned one thing from horror movies, it's that kids are absolutely terrifying. Anyways, Kimberly brushes off those signals of death because of course she does, and she and her friends also ignore the fact that their car engine light is going off because why wouldn't they? We then meet our other victims on the road, a deputy named Thomas Burke, a druggie named Rory Peters, a businesswoman named Kat Jennings, who it was played by the same actress who played the Blue Fairy on Once Upon a Time, and so right off the bat I find myself having a small disliking for her. She pissed me off, but anyways, then we have a motorcyclist named Eugene Dix, a mother and son duo, Nora and Tim Carpenter. I think he was supposed to be the cool guy of this movie, Evan Lewis, and a pregnant lady named Isabella Hudson. Holy shit, that's a lot of characters. As expected, Kimberly gets a premonition of all of their deaths, and Thomas Burke was the one who was struck by the log. Not that that matters, but it matters to me. Of course, she ends up freaking out and she decides to block the on-ramp so that nobody behind her can merge onto the highway. Deputy approaches her to ask her what the fuck she's doing. She explains that she saw their deaths. The other victims are pretty calm in this situation. They were honking and frustrated, but like, if this happened in real life, surely somebody would be getting out of their car, pulling a gun out of somewhere. I'm honestly surprised that one of them didn't like try and ram into one of the other cars or something. I deal with people who come into work screaming because we gave them 3 ranches instead of 4, and you expect me to believe that they just sat in their car and honked their horns. I still remember a time when Caitlin and I were going somewhere. We were like 16 years old. She was just starting off driving, and there was a woman in a red car behind us at a stoplight, and we didn't go the second the light turned green because it was an intersection. We were making sure that the cars pulling up were actually stopping before we pulled out. And anyways, the lady behind us honked her horn, and the look on her face was pure anger, pure female rage, pure hatred. I think that was her villain origin story right then and there behind us in that red car. I cannot describe her face, but it is still so clearly ingrained in my mind. She was just like, that was her reaction to just us not going immediately at a red light. So I don't believe that these people would be so calm being held up. But moving forward, the police officer is trying to get Kimberly to calm down so that he can get the road moving once again. Death shows us that it's playing by different rules in this game because Kimberly and her friends died last in her premonition. But as she was talking to Thomas, the same 8-wheeler that killed them in their premonition swooped by and killed her 3 friends right then and there. We're still pretty early into this movie, so I'm gonna go ahead and put those 3 in the did not deserve it list. They really couldn't have had any idea that death was coming after them, and I don't think there was really anything they could have done to prepare themselves or try and survive it, especially because Kimberly was under the impression that they were going to be last because that's how it was in her premonition. Of course, Kimberly is taken to the police station and she tells the others about what she saw. She even references Flight 180 and says it was a similar circumstance as what happened with Alex Browning. They kind of talk about it a little bit, but then the movie takes us and we catch up with cool guy Evan Lewis, who had apparently just recently won the lottery. He's just hanging out in his apartment with a bunch of shit he just bought, where he throws some spaghetti outside because it was old or something. This is important very soon. He then drops his new ring down the drain that he could have just used to drop the fucking spaghetti into, and sticks his hand with a super thick new watch down the drain to retrieve it. Even if death wasn't coming after me, I think I would still be too scared to just stick my hand right down the drain like that, let alone with a watch like that. I'm always too paranoid that if my hand's down the drain, some ghost is gonna come by and just flick on the switch because they have some weird vendetta against me for having hands. Anyways, Evan naturally is stuck in the drain and something catches on fire nearby and he's unable to put it out because his hand is stuck in the drain. Somehow he does manage to get his hand pulled out of the drain though, and he uses his last brain cell to figure out how to get out of there. He actually ends up smashing a window and getting out through the fire escape. However, he then ends up slipping on the spaghetti that he threw out the window earlier, and the fire ladder falls down and penetrates him through his eyeball. I was having a hard time deciding if he deserved this or not because he technically didn't do anything wrong, but I decided he did deserve it. Death will stop at nothing and will do anything, but honestly, Death didn't even have to try that hard with Evan. Death might have locked the windows and made the ladder fall, but Death didn't force him to stick his hand down the drain. Death, I think, was merely just an accomplice here. Evan did most of the hard work by himself. Oh well, at least he got to be rich for a little while before he died off. Of course, now Evan's death is on the news for all of the survivors to conveniently see at the same time, and Kimberly decides to research the Flight 180 incident and finds out that there was a survivor, Clear. Because obviously they have to bring back one of the old characters so that they can explain everything to the new character. We actually find out that Clear has been pretty smart in her attempts to save herself from death, and she has voluntarily checked herself into a psychiatric facility. It is kind of sad because there's no way she was truly living in there, but it's not like she was truly living on the outside anyways. She was very resourceful in figuring out some way to keep herself safe. Although I personally think if Death really wanted to kill her, he would have still found a way. I don't know why I'm referring to Death as a male. Kimberly goes to see Clear, and of course Clear refuses to help Kimberly at first because she's worked so hard to keep herself safe, but we know they wouldn't bring Clear back to the movie just for this, so don't fret my pets, she'll have a deadly change of heart later. Kimberly does tell Clear that Death is changing up the order this time, which they both find kind of weird. We'll also find out the answer to that dilemma later. We then see Nora and Tim at the dentist's office. While little Timmy's getting his teeth cleaned, a bunch of pigeons just start flying into the windows and through the windows, which naturally distracts everybody, and so the dentist working on little Timmy's teeth literally just up and leaves him alone in the room and almost dies due to an overdose of the laughing gas and a little fishmobile thing falling into his throat. But one of the dentists finds him at the last minute and saves him. He's saved and they get to leave their dentist appointment alive. And perfect timing too, because Kimberly and Thomas see him and they warn Nora and Tim they're gonna die.
I can't remember.
Of course, right after they're warned about death, little Timmy sees a flock of birds and decides that he wants to disrupt them, and so he runs after them, which ends up being right under where a construction site is doing something. And then a large giant glass window comes down and crushes him, all while Nora has to just stand there and watch. He was a cliche annoying kid, but I'm going to say that he didn't deserve his death. Okay, I'm going to completely disregard everything I said about him not deserving his death because upon reevaluation, I realized I was wrong and they did say his age and he's actually 15 years old.
Second one just died. 15-year-old kid.
I originally thought maybe he was meant to be like 12 or 13 and his actor was aged up a little bit, but he's 15. He knew death was coming after them. Nora and Burke made that very clear, and when the people who have guessed your death are running at you talking about the pigeons, maybe don't run up to the flock of pigeons, especially after you just narrowly avoided death. I said I wasn't going to let stupidity off the hook, and yet I still tried to let stupidity off the hook. I don't care if he's an adolescent. He's going in the deserved it category. Now it's time for Clear to join the movie as a character. We don't know what caused this change of heart. I guess she was just having a lot of remorse, but we know she had to have one. We see another returning character, the mortician named Bloodworth, when Clear, Thomas, and Kimberly visit the cemetery. Gives them the same spiel about not cheating death, but does offer some advice by telling them that death can be cheated by the introduction of new life.
You told me death has a distinct design, but Alex and I cheated death not once but dozens of times. The design is flawed, it can be beaten.
Kimberly then gets a little death vision because, by the way, she has visions, and she sees someone drowning in a van and remembers, there was a pregnant woman on the road with them. Nice. How convenient. Time to track down the pregnant lady. Thomas had his fellow cops pull up the record from the road, and they decide to arrest her with false accusations of a stolen vehicle so they can keep her in custody and know when her baby's born so that her unborn baby can save all of them. I feel like they could have gone about this another way besides just arresting the woman. Maybe try communicating first, but okay. Anyways, Clear and Kimberly then give the rest of the survivors the little death rundown. Eugene has a really hard time believing what he's hearing, which is how we know that he's gonna die real soon. Eugene leaves the group conversation, so he can die, and he's followed by Nora. She doesn't really care what happens anymore. There's this creepy guy on the elevator with a box of prosthetic arms and stuff, which obviously makes the both of them uncomfortable, but don't worry, he's just a red herring. While they're off, Rory sees a sign of death in the shadows, and he sees a shadow of someone being hung upside down.
I think I see a man with hooks.
And so they call Nora, who freaks out and immediately thinks like this guy with the box of prosthetic arms is going to kill her. Because she's freaking out, she gets her hair caught in one of the hooks. And somehow she ends up getting her head caught in the elevator door. And we know that there's no way that's gonna end well. It is actually really sad. As she's about to die, Nora starts pleading, saying how she doesn't want to. But Death doesn't care what she wants. She gets decapitated as the elevator starts going up. And I'm gonna go ahead and say Nora, of course, didn't deserve her death at all. She was just a sad lady who lost her husband and her son. She definitely seemed to believe the idea that Death was coming after her. She only just walked off because she decided that she didn't care anymore. And her pleading at the end of her life was honestly really, really sad. She's one of the main characters I felt really bad for throughout this whole franchise. Rest in peace, Nora. Or I guess rest in pieces. Speaking of pieces, Eugene was left with a little piece of Nora on the elevator. Do you believe in the whole death design thing now, Eugene? Do you find it ironic that his initial death was him being decapitated by his own motorcycle and then he had to witness a decapitation? I wonder if Death did it on purpose. Anyways, Eugene freaks out at this point and he for some reason points a gun at Thomas? What the fuck did Thomas do? But then points the gun at himself and says that nobody is going to dictate his own life except himself. But the gun fails despite being completely loaded and he learns that he, I guess, isn't in charge of his own life. Luckily for them, however, Isabella's water breaks, so they don't have to worry about it too much longer. She naturally doesn't want to have the baby in the jail that she shouldn't have been brought to in the first place, and so she makes the officer drive her to a hospital. On the way to the hospital to ensure that the new life is brought into the world, the survivors discuss their pasts, and they find out that they all have actually cheated Death before. Eugene was almost the victim of a fatal school stabbing, Thomas avoided a shootout, and Kat avoided a lethal gas leak because she got held up because there was a girl splattered on a bus. Which of course brings us back to Terry from the first movie. Eugene missed the stabbing because he was transferred to another school to replace Miss Luton. Thomas avoided death because he was busy cleaning up Billy's head. Rory says he avoided a huge building collapse because he was distracted by a guy getting hit with a sign, which of course was generic asshole Carter. What about Kimberly? I guess she was almost killed, but she was distracted by the news report of Todd's suicide. So if the people on Flight 180 died when they were supposed to, these characters would have died much sooner. So that's why Death was kind of working in reverse and trying to clean up loose ends. I'm not going to lie and say it makes complete sense, but I do like that they tried to tie the two movies together like that. And I do think it really just showcases like the butterfly effect, how one little thing can affect a million other things. And it's very probable that their deaths affected a lot of other people's deaths as well. Anyways, back to the new life. The survivors never make it to the hospital because their tire blows out and they crash into a bunch of PVC pipes. Kat ends up being pinned to her seat by a log, which is funny because, you know, the log thing. And Eugene was stabbed right through his torso. Eugene gets taken to the hospital and rescue workers try to free Kat. Can't you just use your blue fairy magic to get out of there, Kat? Somewhere along the line, there's this random kid named Brian Gibbons who is almost hit by a van, but Rory steps in and saves him. This will be important later, don't worry.
You trying to get yourself killed, little boy? Gotta use your head, man.
Anyways, while she's being saved, Kat has the audacity to complain about the loudness of the chainsaw that is being used to attempt to save her, and she asks the people trying to get her out to turn it down.
Could you be a little quieter with that thing, please?
Yeah, sure. I'll just put it on quiet mode.
That would be good.
They end up accidentally setting off the airbag, which kills Kat. Yes, it's no longer who let the cat out of the bag, but who let the bag hit the cat. That was stupid. I'm sorry. Anyways, Kat's ever-present cigarette falls from her hand and lights a gas trail from their vehicle being hit by something, which explodes a van and sends a barbed wire crashing into Rory, and we get a beautiful shot of him just breaking into pieces. Oh, Kat, didn't you listen to Smokey the Bear saying that smoking kills? I'm gonna go ahead and say that Rory didn't deserve his death. He was played up to be a little bit of an asshole in some scenes, but for the most part, he didn't really do anything either. He just kind of existed, and honestly, I kind of forgot he even existed unless there was a scene where he was specifically on screen. That's kind of how I felt about most of the characters in this movie. He did have a last-minute change of heart saving that random kid, though. I'm gonna go ahead and say Kat didn't deserve her death either. She was a little irritating, but I can't let my vendetta against her being the blue fairy cloud my judgment in this. She really didn't do anything wrong. She was taking the idea of them dying seriously, and I guess I can't even blame her for being a little overstimulated by the sound when she was, you know, on the verge of death. I suppose there's not really much she can do to help herself when she's pinned in her seat. Kimberly, Clear, and Burke then arrive at the hospital where they found out that Isabella had her baby.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Who the hell are they?
Wonderful, right? Wrong, because now Kimberly has a vision and finds out that Isabella was never supposed to die in that crash in the first place, so her new baby means nothing to them. The movie just wanted you to think that maybe everything was alright before it decides to kill off Clear. She goes to check on Eugene and ends up getting killed in an explosion that was set off by medical equipment. Eugene dies too, obviously, in this 2-for-1 explosion combo. For Eugene, I'm gonna say he didn't deserve his death. Overall, I don't think he was being too dumb about it. He wasn't really necessarily trying to put himself in terrible situations, and I think he was, for the most part, trying to avoid death, except when he wanted to dictate the end of his own life himself. His death was also something he really didn't get the chance to even attempt to avoid, since he was already not doing very well, since he was, you know, stabbed through the chest. However, I am going to say that Clear deserved her death. She was actually a great person, but we all know kindness kills in horror movies. We knew she was bound to die because sequels don't usually bring up returning characters like that unless they're meant to be a final girl like Sidney Prescott or Laurie Strode. The downfall was agreeing to help Death's new victims while still being a target of Death herself. It was the kind thing to do, but it killed her. In a way, even though it was sad, she kind of got what was coming to her. Rest in peace, Clear. Kimberly then somehow realizes that the visions she's been having were actually visions of herself. Silly. And then, conveniently, she sees like a white ambulance van outside and a lake conveniently right there, so she knows what she has to do. She gets herself into that van, drives straight into the lake, and is saved by Thomas. And then a nurse who resuscitates her. And she's a new life. So they're fine. They're good. Death's whole plan was cheated. A few months later then, Kimberly and Thomas are celebrating life with that Brian Gibbons guy. I don't know what his connection with them is other than being saved by one of them, but here he is. And like Brian's family too, for whatever reason. And Brian brings up the fact that he was saved from death. You know what that means? Yeah, he died. And I'm gonna have to say that he didn't deserve it either. He didn't even really fully know the situation, as far as I'm aware. But of course, I don't think there was really any way he could have been smarter or tried to save himself from something he didn't know was happening. This movie had a lot more people non-deserving of their deaths than those who deserved it. I think they were definitely a little bit smarter in this movie, and it definitely helps the fact that they had Clear coming back to help them a little bit, and that they knew about the Flight 180 issue. This movie left us with 10 characters who did not deserve their death, and only 2 who did. But for the whole franchise so far, that is 14 non-deserving and 5 deserving, so it doesn't really even up the ratio at all. It's still pretty, unbalanced. So naturally, out of those 2, our stupidest death award goes to cool guy Evan Lewis. He was just a fucking idiot. What can I say? And for the least deserving of death, probably just gonna go ahead and give it to Brian, because I know literally nothing about him and I don't think he knew anything about the situation either. He just died while trying to enjoy a barbecue. So that's the end of Final Destination 2, but I already know that a lot of the characters in the next Final Destination were a little more deserving of their deaths. So stay tuned for that one. With that being said, peace out.